Hey, power people. With just 2 days till Halloween, we're pulling back the curtain on the most frightening global blackouts and the ghoulishly funny causes of power outages that'll make you wonder if there's a trickster in the grid. From terrifyingly massive outages affecting millions to comically small culprits that'll give you a chuckle, we're shining a light on the dark side of power failures. Picture this: 620 million people plunged into darkness in India. No ghosts or goblins needed. Just a massive grid failure. Or Brazil, where lightning brought the power grid to its knees, leaving nearly 100 million people in the dark. But don't worry, we've also got lighter tales about balloons, squirrels, and other creatures as if summoned by a mischievous spirit. Today, we'll guide you through the chilling details of the world's biggest blackouts and then lighten the mood with some funny stories. This Halloween episode will leave you both shocked and wondering what's going to be the cause of the next power outage at your business. All right, Gareth. So what are the biggest outages of all time?
Well, great intro, Dan. And you touched briefly on the biggest of all time. India, blackout 2012. At the time, this was almost 9% of the world's population, 620 million people. And in some areas, it actually lasted up to 2 days. So this was a massive grid failure that occurred due to an overdraw of electricity on the Indian northern grid. And it caused this cascading failure across northern, eastern, and northeastern India. And this was all as a result of weak infrastructure and poor coordination between the grid and the state. And it contributed to this blackout. So it affected 20 of India's 28 states and caused massive disruptions to transportation, healthcare, water, supplies, and communication. But imagine that, like essentially double the US population all in darkness for 2 days.
Wow, that would be pretty wild. Well, coming in at number 2 is the Indonesian blackout of 2005. This was in August 18th of 2005. It was affecting around 100 million people and for up to 11 hours in some areas. And this blackout was caused by a failure in the transmission line linking a power plant in West Java to the capital city of Jakarta. The failure quickly spread across the Java and Bali grid, and it affected major cities across the whole region. The outage caused significant economic disruptions, and given the massive scope of the blackout, it really just highlighted the fragility of the country's energy infrastructure. And unfortunately, we're not too far off here in the States.
Yeah, and then coming in at number 3, Dan, was Brazil back in '99. It actually impacted 97 million people for about 5 hours, and this was a lightning strike, interestingly, in Sao Paulo, and it caused failures across the grid, taking down power stations and transmission lines. At the time, and still to this day, Brazil's electricity system is highly centralized, making it vulnerable to these widespread cascading failures. And the notable consequence was that the blackout impacted really large parts of Brazil, including Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, and it even rolled into Paraguay. Dan, closer to home, what are the big outages that have impacted the US?
Oof. I think we can all remember back to the Northeast blackout of 2003. Again, happening in August. Seems to be a theme here, maybe because it's hot and the grids are strained. But this one impacted 50 million people, and in some cases lasted 2 days, with smaller areas lasting 4 days. And in this case, it was actually a combination of things. It was a combination of a tree branch that due to sagging power lines that tripped off the trips on the grid, and then informed the control room at First Energy Corporation in Ohio. Yet there was a bug in their software system that didn't allow for this two-way communication. And it ultimately led to this cascading impact across the entire Eastern grid. And this impacted everything from New York to Cleveland to Detroit and Toronto. And the economic losses were absolutely staggering, between $6 to $10 billion. And really, unfortunately, 11 deaths were reported due to this blackout.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think the one that stands out for me at number 2 is Superstorm Sandy, the hurricane that caused widespread damage to the power grid in the Northeast US again, with over 8.5 million people losing power, in some cases for up to a week. And I think hurricanes are becoming a common theme. Dan, what about that Maria hurricane in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, unfortunately, and it's just a handful of years back in 2017, Hurricane Maria impacted 3.4 million people across Puerto Rico. And this one was, absolutely devastating. There was some places that had lost power for nearly a year. And when an entire grid goes down like that, it's not something that you can just flip the switch back on. It takes a lot of effort to get frequencies and everything going correctly. So, this was a Category 4 hurricane with rain and just really devastated their power infrastructure. And ultimately, it led to the humanitarian crisis that had really prolonged impacts across hospitals and healthcare systems, water distribution, communication. Frankly, we continue to read stories of Puerto Rico still working to rebuild. And unfortunately, just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a Category 4 and a Category 3 hit the U.S. and have absolutely devastating impacts. But Gareth, one of the things that stood out to me when we went through these 6 major outages globally and here in the U.S. is that really only 2 of them were impacted by let's call it extreme weather events. A third in Brazil being impacted by a lightning strike. And I think that that's something that we all need to remind ourselves of, is that it's not just these very shocking images that we get of hurricanes and wildfires and tornadoes and others. These can happen due to bugs in software and, issues with protective switch relays and other hardware. So, beyond these major outages, Gareth, what are some other crazy causes of outages?
Well, certainly cyber attacks are becoming an increasing concern for people. And a really interesting one that caught my eye was back in 2015, Ukraine suffered a power grid attack whereby 230,000 people were left without power because hackers had managed to infiltrate the regional electricity distribution centers. And so cyber is becoming increasingly interesting, but animals are also a major culprit. And Dan, I know you're a big fan of the squirrels.
Yeah, I jokingly, I've brought it up in calls with customers, kind of jokingly about squirrels, but I was doing some research as we prepared, and I was actually a bit surprised that between 3,000 to 5,000 outages a year here in the U.S. are caused by animal interference. And which is absolutely insane. Now, for those of you that are wondering, what are the biggest culprits of animal related outages? And I think this is important for all of us to remember. We may not be in a wildfire zone or a hurricane zone or a tornado zone, but we almost all certainly live where there are squirrels, where there are birds, where there are snakes, or even raccoons. And, a notable incident, back in 2015 in Washington, D.C. was due to a raccoon causing a rather significant power outage, including the White House, because it was tampering with a transformer at a substation. I know you found a couple others as well.
Yeah, I think the one that's almost most comical and most unexpected was in Japan back in 2006. This was a really bizarre incident where a bird was flying along, it caught a fish, and it dropped it onto a power line, which short-circuited the power and knocked out power for over 10,000 homes. And it's kind of a bizarre one, but also Mylar balloons are a major culprit. And this is annually you hear about, we all have these helium balloons that are super fun at the time, but they become a massive culprit of power outages. In Arizona's territory, they reported over 60 outages in 2002 as a result of these balloons. Southern California, Edison, right near where you and I are, Dan, 97 power outages in a year as a result of the balloons floating into power lines, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's something that we just constantly overlook. And then just again back onto the hardware failure is the large grid transformers. You've heard me, or I guess have heard me say on past episodes, but a good reminder that The average expected life of large grid transformers is 25 years. Yet when you look across the U.S. grid and the transmission and distribution system, the average age of large grid transformers is 40 years. Expected life 25 years, average age is 40 years. Pretty staggering.
Yeah, I'd say on the Halloween note, what's even more scary is FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They said back in 2013 that as few as 9 of those transformers, Dan, taken out across the nation could cause the whole country to go into blackout. Which,
back to the comment on Puerto Rico, once the entire grid goes down, this is not a 8, 10, 48-hour outage. This is going to take many days, weeks to bring everything back online, and it just have devastating knock-on effects. So hopefully this doesn't scare too many people. But at the same time, we should all be aware that the most common thing that we all think about is these major weather events impacting outages. And again, we're recording this here in mid-October, having the Florida and the East Coast, Southeast just absolutely pummeled by Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton. I think you said 400,000 folks still without power in Florida as a result of Hurricane Milton that just rolled through. And just back up in my hometown where I grew up in Northern California, PG&E Territory has just issued a warning to the millions of customers that they have that there will be consistent public safety power shutoffs over the next several days because there's expected to be high winds, high temperatures, and low humidity, and that is just an absolute recipe for wildfire. And rather than risk the chance of a wildfire, they're just turning off the grid, which impacts businesses and residential customers alike. So, pretty chilling time. But within all this, Gareth, Halloween happens to be a fun holiday. Any special plans for you and the fam?
Well, it's starting as early as this Friday. Ethan's got his Friday fall festival at the school. So we spent an hour or so last night putting black tape on this white tracksuit for him. So he looked like a stick man, a soccer stick man. So that's my Halloween effort. But yeah, he'll definitely be out trick-or-treating. We'll be hanging out with him, cruising around the community. It'll be fun. How are you?
Love it. Yeah, we're going to be, we've actually for the last 3 years have had a tradition, and it's a very fun, go over to some close friends of ours who have 2 little girls the same age as our boys. We'll be going over to their neighborhood because their neighborhood goes absolutely wild. It's really cool. It's a really long street, probably 150 houses on it, but I'm telling you, 75% of the houses are absolutely decked out. Their next door neighbor 2 years ago had a massive, probably 20-foot long, 10 feet high pirate ship built in his front yard that had smoke and sounds and all kinds of stuff. And the kids absolutely love it. So that's what we'll be doing.
What's your costume going to be?
I knew you were going to ask me, and I don't have it figured out yet. By the time this episode airs, I will have a costume and maybe we splice it in.
I went as a hot dog last year. I was the only adult that was dressed up, so I'll have to think twice about whether I embarrass myself again.
Oh no, I'll definitely be putting something on. Time will tell. We have a birthday coming up in our family with one of our boys, and we're having a magician theme. So maybe I'll be borrowing some of the outfits from that.
Nice, love it. Well, sobering, fun, and spooky all at the same time. Halloween is all about being scared of the dark, and I think none of us want the power to go out. So it certainly boils down to why we're on this mission to ensure resilient, reliable, affordable, clean power for all. And so consider this when you're next thinking about your Halloween adventures, but also your business continuity and operations.
Yeah. Cheers, Kath.
All right, cheers. Bye.
We receive a lot of questions from business leaders around the world wanting to learn more about the energy transition, what is possible, and where to start. So to help you stay informed and up to date on best practices, opportunities, risks, and success stories, we created an industry newsfeed at VECKTA.com/news with all our podcasts, blogs, and newsletter. Check it out and connect with Dan, myself, and the VECKTA team to learn more. Cheers and have a good one.